I now give the floor to Mr. Murad Akincilar from CETIM. Mr. Akincilar, you have the floor. I believe he's joining us online.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do you hear me properly?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President, and greetings from the Middle East, and salutations to all fellows and colleagues and the experts. As Europe Third World Center, we consider that more civil society organizations, including ours, need to develop a community-based approach, empowering the participation from below in order to encourage the overall involvement of citizens in support of the right to development. This approach should be connected with the reality of the especially dispossessed social groups, so that the basics of the active, free, and meaningful participation are guaranteed. We cannot close our eyes to the fact that the main obstacle is a combination of the patterns of domination over the civil society organizations. What is limiting the community-based participation is the increasing infringements on their freedom of association, assembly, and expression. In short, what we call the shrinking space for civil society. The participation capacity of CSOs in many countries is fragilized by the deterioration of the working environment for the NGOs and CSOs, as well as insidious actions to limit civil society freedoms, especially since the pandemic and the global recession. The same period is stamped by the drastically growing inequalities. So let's clearly identify the main obstacle to the promotion of the realization of the right to development. That is the political, financial, and social forces narrowing the space for the independent social movements are more or less similar forces, excluding, criminalizing, and marginalizing the same social movements. These are the same forces which are delaying the realizations of the RTD, benefiting from the growing inequalities and fragilizing the social protection systems. There is a need to admit a considerable delay also in ordinary citizens' influence over policymaking since the 90s. This is one of the reasons why the people-centered participation was out of phase with the actual appliance of the so-called sustainable development goals. We unfortunately had to inherit the similar patterns of exclusion and delays in the implementation of the right to development. Today, we need to redefine, encourage, and realize real synergies in order to create common grounds with diverse advocacy and emancipation spheres. We think there is a way out of this marginalization of the citizen in public debate. The self-determined development promoted by the independent social movement can become an operating principle in promoting the right to development before the local, national, and international mechanisms. In this respect, let me define some characteristics of good practices regarding social movements active on the ground. First, they adopt an awareness about the fact that, it's in a way of realism, the mainstream CSOs do not necessarily represent even the smallest sections of the civil society in most countries. Two, they are aware of the intersectionality of the environment, gender, and labor movements agenda. Thirdly, they conduct capacity building process independently from governmental framing, economic corporate powers, and political instrumentalization. 4, they practice socially deeply rooted action. They elaborate diverse pathways for further protection of the elements of the right to development. 5th, they create local, regional, and international networks to defend elements of right to development and then coordinate these efforts. 6, they are in active defense of the human rights defenders from the repression. And last but not least, they encourage CSO professionals to go into the field, close the gap between the organization's routine work and the daily survival of the concerned communities struggling for their economic and social survival. So let me present 3 examples of best practices in the specificity of some movements. For example, in Chipko movement in India, they have stopped tree felling in India and has generated pressure for a national resource policy that is more sensitive to people's needs and ecological requirements. At a grassroots level, that is a women-led organization and closely linked to the decolonization struggle for self-determination on national resources. In Eastern Mediterranean, environmental organizations created technology against neoliberal working conditions. It was an example of trade unions struggling for the protection of the ecosystems and eco-feminist organizations defending decent working conditions and developing policies against occupational diseases. And Movimiento Sin Tierra, landless peasant movement, was survival strategies in Brazil in defense of water, food, and land sovereignty, combining objectives in favor of indigenous political ecologies. This movement is combining gender justice with battles against racism and other modes of exclusion and seeking radical break with the continuities of colonial policies. So, Mr. President, today as CSO professionals, experts, social movement activists, right to development experts, more than didactic discourses, diplomatic activities, and lobbying activities, we need real involvement to rebuild networks of movements through involvement on the ground with citizens and local communities. And thank you very much for your attention. I thank you also to my colleagues on the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akincilar, for your excellent remarks. You have, I think, rightly highlighted the importance of community-based participation in development, or development from below, as is often also referred to. But I think you also hit the nail on the head when you talked about the main obstacles that civil society organizations face. Of course, we in the expert mechanism have been aware of this, but to hear it from an important civil society organization is very important as well. You talked about the shrinking of civic space, the freedom of association, peaceful assembly, but generally the political, social, and financial space being limited for civil society organizations and social movements as probably the most important obstacle in promoting the right to development. You also talked about the importance of self-determined development by social movements before the nationals, locals, or even international governments decide on those policies. And I think the right to development plays an important role in reinforcing the norm that development priorities are to be determined by the rights holders of the right to development, which are human beings and peoples. They are the ones that determine what development means to them. In that sense, The many examples you gave about the good practices are very helpful. Those are definitely illustrations of how civil society organizations and social movements in particular can help reinvigorate, can help better realize the right to development. And I come back to the same point that right to development, of course, as a self-standing right, needs to be improved by itself, but it also plays an instrumental role in helping realize many other human rights, especially the right to participate in, contribute to, and enjoy the right to development. So thank you very much for your comments.